I am marrying a womb." Those were Napoleon Bonaparte's words about his second wife, Marie Louise. And if your first reaction was, "Wait, Napoleon had a second wife?" you are probably not alone. His name is so inseparably connected with Josephine that many people completely forget there was another wife in his life, even though she was the woman who gave him the child he had wanted for so long. In today's video, we're going to look at the marriage that helped seal Napoleon's fate, and at the complicated love triangle between Napoleon, Josephine, and Marie Louise. Hit the like button and let's get started. One autumn day in 1795, in Paris, inside the salon of the famous socialite Madame Tallien, a young general who was only beginning his rise to fame, Napoleon Bonaparte met Marie-Joseph Rose de Beauharnais, better known to you as Josephine, a name that, by the way, Napoleon himself came up with for her. Josephine was not exactly a great beauty, despite the way films and TV series about her often like to portray her. On the contrary, she was a woman 6 years older than Napoleon, a widow with a scandalous reputation, 2 children, and bad teeth caused by her love of sugar. For the 27-year-old Napoleon, who at that time was still rather inexperienced when it came to women and lived very modestly on a fairly small income, Josephine was an excellent match and, more importantly, a ticket into the world of high society connections, without which it was extremely difficult to secure important appointments and climb any higher. And so their romance began, eventually turning into a turbulent marriage filled with affairs, scandals, and scenes that, looking at them through modern eyes, we would probably describe as a very toxic relationship and one enormous red flag. At exactly the same time, while our 2 protagonists were busy being consumed by their passions, far away from Paris, in Vienna, a little princess from the Habsburg dynasty was growing up, a girl who would one day become part of this story, Marie Louise. If someone had told Napoleon at that time that this princess would one day become his wife, he probably would have laughed for a very long time. Marie Louise's origins were so incredibly high that a minor Corsican aristocrat like Napoleon would hardly even have had the chance to find himself in the same drawing room as members of her family. She was born into the family of Francis II, the future emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and Maria Theresa of Naples and Sicily. Marie Louise's childhood could have been called fairly typical for a girl of her class, if not for one rather important detail. She was raised according to extremely strict moral standards, and as one of the most valuable potential brides in Europe, she was expected to remain as innocent as humanly possible. Her parents tried to eliminate practically every possible male influence from her surroundings. It reached such an absurd level that even all of the girls' pets were allowed to be female only. Ironically, none of this would really work, and later, this particular part of her upbringing would come back in a rather unexpected way, because Marie Louise's own nature would eventually win out. But strict morality was not the only thing being cultivated in her. There was another feeling as well: hatred of the French. Her family remembered very well what the French had done to Marie Antoinette, who was a relative of Marie Louise, and her native Austria continued to fight against France during the Napoleonic Wars. Even before Marie Louise was old enough to properly understand what war or peace actually meant, she already knew one thing very clearly: Napoleon was a monster. The girl even had a little wooden soldier among her toys whom she called Bonaparte. And as you can probably imagine, that poor soldier got the worst of it. And as the years went by, her hatred only grew stronger because this man had taken a great deal from her family. He had taken away the peaceful life they once had in Vienna when he occupied the city, while her father's defeat at the Battle of Austerlitz and the peace that followed contributed to the collapse of the Holy Roman Empire, leaving her father no longer its emperor, but simply the Emperor of Austria. To Marie Louise, Napoleon was evil itself, a devil, almost the Antichrist. Oh, if only she had known what fate had in store for her. On December 20th, 1809, Napoleon I divorced Josephine because she was unable to give him a child. By that point, he was no longer simply a general, but a dictator who now carried the title of emperor, and desperately needed an heir to continue what, at the time, he believed would become his own dynasty. Napoleon began searching for a suitable bride, and when Marie Louise heard about it, all she wrote to one of her friends was, "God help the woman who becomes his wife." At first, Napoleon wanted to marry the sister of the Russian Tsar, but the Russian court did not trust him very much and kept delaying its answer. That was when the Austrian diplomat Count Metternich convinced the Austrian emperor that Napoleon's new wife should be his beloved daughter. First of all, this marriage was supposed to put an end to the conflict between the two countries and give Napoleon something he could once only have dreamed of: a family connection to one of the most important and powerful dynasties in Europe. And secondly, the Austrians secretly hoped that once Napoleon became occupied with family life, and, most importantly, with producing the heir he wanted so badly, he might finally reduce his military ambitions and, in a way, turn into something of a homebody. Obviously, Marie Louise had absolutely no desire to marry a man she hated, but she submitted to her father's will and sacrificed herself for the sake of her country. It is difficult to imagine what this young woman must have felt as she was sent to France to become the wife of a man she barely knew. Interestingly, when Marie Louise arrived, Napoleon arranged for her almost the same ceremony that the young Marie Antoinette had once gone through when she first came to France. Marie Louise had to pass through 3 rooms. In the Austrian room, she was required to leave behind all of her clothes, then pass through a neutral room, and finally enter the French one, emerging into her new homeland as, symbolically, a true French woman. But if I were in her place, I think I would have been more terrified by such a welcome than pleased by it, especially considering how the story of her predecessor had ended. Despite preparing herself to fall into the hands of some kind of Corsican monster, Marie Louise was pleasantly surprised when she finally met Napoleon, and he, in turn, was just as pleasantly surprised by her. Napoleon turned out to be a fairly gallant man. At the very least, he did not tell the girl to her face that she was there simply to produce children, and instead behaved like a gentleman. To Napoleon's credit, throughout their entire, rather short life together, he treated Marie Louise with a great deal of respect. In other words, a union that had every chance of becoming a complete disaster turned out to be not so bad after all. Just a few months after the wedding, Marie Louise was already writing a very different kind of letter to her friend, wishing her the same happiness in marriage that she herself had found. But was it really love? Personally, I think that for Napoleon, Marie Louise was partly a trophy, another symbol of the new level of greatness he had managed to achieve. And for her, perhaps it was simply a way of adapting to the situation and convincing herself that she was in love because, realistically, she had no other choice. And in a way, the Austrian plan actually worked. Napoleon did everything he could to please his young wife. He even started learning how to dance, changed his style, and spent a great deal of time with her, sometimes putting important political matters and decisions on the back burner. But just like her relative Marie Antoinette, Marie Louise was never truly loved in France. Compared with Josephine, she seemed almost out of place. She was not as striking, sophisticated, or witty. She was too simple, too straightforward for the French court. And yet, unlike her predecessor, she did not spend enormous amounts of money. Josephine was constantly drowning in debt, something that, as you can imagine, the French did not exactly forgive in Marie Antoinette either. Marie Louise, on the other hand, was meticulous, obedient, and always stayed within her budget. In general, she behaved like an almost model wife, submitting to her husband and doing what was expected of her. But none of that helped her win the love of Napoleon's subjects, and in the end, she still received the same nickname that had once been given to Marie Antoinette, the Austrian woman. And as you can see, even though by that point Josephine was already living far away from Napoleon and from the centre of events, she was still invisibly present in this marriage, constantly giving people a reason to compare the two women. Napoleon continued writing to Josephine, still addressing her as my beloved. He even tried to do something that Prince Charles would manage to pull off much later: introduce the two women in his life and somehow make them friends. Marie Louise, however, responded to the idea with tears and hysterics, so the meeting never happened. Perhaps, much like her relative Marie Antoinette had once looked down on Madame du Barry at court, Marie Louise saw Josephine as a woman beneath her dignity, someone she simply had no reason to meet. And every time her husband was preparing to go and see Josephine, Marie Louise would make a whole scene, complete with tricks, tears, and emotional outbursts. Then, on March 20th, 1811, Marie Louise finally accomplished what this entire marriage had essentially been arranged for. You could say she fulfilled the purpose of her womb. She gave birth to a son, Napoleon Francois Charles Joseph Bonaparte, who was given the title King of Rome. The birth was extremely difficult for Marie Louise, and at one point, Napoleon was reportedly faced with the question of whose life should be saved if a choice had to be made, the baby's or the mother's. To his credit, he chose Marie Louise. Napoleon also said that he would rather his wife never give birth again than allow her to go through the same suffering a second time. When Josephine learned that the long-awaited heir had finally been born, she wrote a touching letter to both Napoleon and Marie Louise. Although it is hard to imagine that this could have done much to bring the two women closer. Marie Louise was absolutely furious when Napoleon decided to take their newborn son to meet Josephine. And Josephine burst into tears when she saw the child for whose birth she herself had been forced to give up everything she once had. Just a year after Napoleon finally seemed to have everything he could possibly dream of, fortune turned its back on him. Perhaps that same fascination with family life and his growing neglect of political affairs played a role, because his invasion of Russia ended in catastrophe. Perhaps it was also the betrayal of his wife's family who broke their alliance with him. One defeat followed another. The man who had once shocked the world with his victories was now suffering devastating losses again and again, until eventually Napoleon was forced to abdicate and was exiled to the island of Elba, while Marie Louise had to return to Vienna with their son. She wanted to rejoin her husband as soon as possible, but her family, along with the very same Count Metternich, who had once sent her to Napoleon, had a completely different plan. They prevented her from replying to Napoleon's letters, and into her immediate circle, they placed a charming Austrian officer named Adam Albert von Nieperg, who had been given very clear instructions. By any means necessary, he was to persuade Marie Louise not to reunite with her husband. Nieperg was an experienced man, and it did not take him very long to seduce a young woman whose experience with men was still limited almost entirely to what she had gained during her marriage. After that, any serious talk of reuniting Napoleon and Marie Louise was essentially over. Marie Louise would never see her husband again. Napoleon, meanwhile, continued to keep a portrait of his wife even during his imprisonment on St. Helena, and apparently held no real resentment toward her. And yet, when he lay dying, it was Josephine whom he remembered among his final words. All this time, Marie Louise was living with her lover and had 3 children with him, whose existence was kept a closely guarded secret. Even her son with Napoleon had no idea that they existed. When the boy eventually grew old enough to learn the truth, he was shocked and condemned his mother for it, even saying that Josephine would have made a far better wife for Napoleon. The young Napoleon lived a very short life, and with his health always being rather fragile, he died of tuberculosis at just 21 years old. And in a strange way, there is something of a parallel here with Henry VIII. The son, who had once been needed at almost any cost, ultimately failed to continue the dynasty whose survival had seemed so incredibly important to his father. 8 years after Marie Louise had finally managed to marry the man she clearly loved, her husband suddenly died of heart disease. After that came a string of lovers, something her family strongly disapproved of because of the rather free lifestyle she had begun to lead. Eventually, Marie Louise married for the 3rd time. This time, however, it was not for love, but for a much more practical reason. She simply felt that she needed someone by her side who could help her govern the Duchy of Parma, which had been given to her. And perhaps Marie Louise never became the ideal empress the French had hoped she would be, but here in Parma, through her actions and charitable work, she earned the nickname the Good Duchess, and spent the rest of her life living the way she had always wanted most, in peace. Marie Louise died just a few days after her 56th birthday. The son of our heroine once described Marie Louise as good but weak. Do you agree with his opinion? And how do you think history might have unfolded if Napoleon had stayed with Josephine? Write your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.